Susan Rice, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you. How are you?
We're wonderful. Thank you. So much to cover. I'm sure you're very, very busy. Tell us, first of all, what is at stake, in your opinion, in this election? What are we looking at as far as the future of America?
Oh my goodness, Jane, it couldn't be more serious. We often hear we're old enough to remember people saying, "Oh, this is the most important election of our lifetime," blah blah blah,
Yep.
and where everybody rolls their eyes and says, "Okay." I really truly believe that's the case this time, and let me explain why. There's so much at stake. There's the direction of our country in terms of our economy. There's the question of whether we will have preserved and extended our fundamental freedoms, such as the right to determine what happens to our own bodies, the right to love who you love and marry whom you want, the right to vote and to be protected from extreme gun violence. But there's also our democracy on the ballot. And in Donald Trump, we have someone who has been very explicit that he wants to exercise in his term extreme power to terminate the Constitution. This is all his language, to be a dictator from day one. And now, frighteningly, we are hearing him say repeatedly and unabashedly that, in his judgment, the greatest threat to the United States is not Russia, not China, but the so-called enemy within. And basically, that's every American who disagrees with him and doesn't subscribe to his extreme MAGA agenda. And what's worse is that he has said repeatedly that his intention is to use the U.S. military against the enemy within. And there's nothing more fascist than that. It's a recipe for civil conflict, turning the military against our population. It's extreme. And we now have a circumstance where, if he were to return to power, people who were law-abiding and believed in the Constitution, who served in his first term, people like General Mark Milley, like General Jim Mattis, who was the defense secretary, like General John Kelly, who was his chief of staff, won't be there. Mike Pence won't be there. He'll be surrounded by sycophants and lackeys who will go along with his extreme decisions to violate the rule of law and upend the Constitution. And the worst part is that the Supreme Court has now said that the President of the United States is immune and in effect has impunity from prosecution for acts committed while president. So an unhinged, unstable Donald Trump, who's clearly losing his grip, who's got an extremist approach that is completely anti-democratic and indeed fascist, as John Kelly, his chief of staff, has said, and as Mark Milley and Jim Mattis have said, will be without any constraints around him or from the Supreme Court. And that's a terrifying prospect, and that's why truly, in addition to all that's at stake with respect to the economy and freedoms, which I'd love to talk more about, this is the most consequential election that we're facing. And so we really, truly need to get out and vote like our lives depend on it, because, truly they do.
If you're just joining us, former UN ambassador, also national security advisor, Susan Rice is joining us, and we're talking about what's at stake in this election. Let's go back to the economy for just a second, Susan. Donald Trump has talked about tariffs and how great tariffs are. And we're going to tariff so much that we're just going to be swimming in money that's going to pay for everything. We are actually going to talk to someone tomorrow who is an expert on tariffs. And there also have been numerous, isn't it, like 16 economists have come out and said Donald Trump's plan is going to either push us into a recession or a depression.
Well, absolutely. I mean, his tariffs, which are for him the answer to everything. It's how he proposes to raise revenue and deal with every problem under the sun. It will be, according to all the top economists, extremely inflationary and will harm the economy and set us back. But the other thing is Americans are struggling with high costs as it is. We have the strongest economy in the world. We have the lowest inflation of any major economy, but it is still very difficult for folks to to deal with everyday prices, whether for housing or food or anything else. And Donald Trump's tariff proposal, which is to slap up to 20% tariff on everything coming into the United States, your food, your toys, your electronics, your oil, would amount to an additional $4,000 of costs, a tax in effect, on the average American family every year. Nobody can afford that. So higher inflation, $4,000 tax on the average American family, and destabilizing what is now remarkably, in macroeconomic terms, the strongest economy in the world.
It's really difficult to talk to people about because we try to talk about the economy in the broadest terms of saying, look at our inflation, look at the jobs, look at all these points, and it does always come down to the fact that it's about the groceries on the shelves. And that's one thing that we try to put across too, is that we're looking at like things like price gouging and price hikes, how that's harming the people, and how we believe Kamala Harris is going to try to work to keep that from happening, versus Donald Trump, who doesn't seem to care all that much, just thinks, as we've said, tariffs will do all the work.
Tariffs fix everything. And
yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's like tariffs are the financial Band-Aid for everything. And it's just, and that's all we need to do. And not to mention what that would do to our farmers. We're a big agriculture state in Wisconsin, and our farmers would just be decimated by this.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many things wrong with the tariff concept. First of all, it is not something that foreign countries pay. This is the biggest fallacy of all.
Right.
Foreign countries do not pay for the tariffs. The American people pay for the tariffs. What happens is a country sells, let's say, bananas to a United States buyer, a U.S. company. The U.S. company has to pay the costs, and they pass that on to the American consumer. So the notion that this is somehow penalizing foreign countries is completely wrong. It is a tax on the American people. So that's the first problem with it. Secondly, it's indiscriminate. We're going to penalize, close friends and allies like Canada to the same extent we punish, a hostile country. And that makes no sense. How do we expect our friends and allies whose partnership we need to deal with the greatest threats we face, whether from Russia or China or Iran, to continue to want to work with us when we are screwing them and their economy for no good reason? I mean, it makes no sense. It's the worst possible policy.
And that's something I wanted to bring up with you as well. It is safe to say you've spent a great deal of your career on the world stage watching all sorts of situations either happen or keeping them from, whether it's war, invasion, just all those worldwide events happening. Have you ever seen anything like what we're about to step into, a situation where we might walk out of NATO, a situation where we're cozying up to dictators all over the world? I mean, I feel like the supporters of Donald Trump do not understand the impact that will have on America and then the world.
Absolutely. No, this is deadly serious. This week, Vladimir Putin hosted a summit of the BRICS countries. This is, kind of the rogues gallery. China, Iran, a bunch of countries that are adversaries of the United States. They're coming together and increasingly cooperating in opposition to the United States and our European and Asian allies. The prospect of North Korean troops inside of Ukraine is indicative of this threat. And Donald Trump wants to abandon the greatest alliance the world has ever seen in NATO. NATO has only ever once invoked Article 5, which is the mutual defense treaty, element of the NATO treaty. And that was after 9/11, when the
Right.
United States was attacked. And our NATO allies came together in support of us in Afghanistan and in the global war on terror. Donald Trump wants to abandon that and turn all of our relationships into transactions. That's not how we make America strong. America alone is not America strong. And that's what his version of America First amounts to. And the other thing is, he is perversely attracted to and has outsized affection and fealty to dictators.
Yes.
To Xi Jinping, to Vladimir Putin. It's almost as if he wants to join the BRICS and join with his fascist buddies, rather than stand up for the principles and the values that have long defined the United States of America.
Yeah,
and that's frightening.
He has authoritarian envy.
Exactly.
He does.
Exactly.
He does.
Exactly.
It's Viktor Orban of Hungary. He keeps praising. He said, if just this week, our North Korea and China necessarily are enemies. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. Are they? We're going to continue our conversation with Susan Rice, former UN ambassador and former U.S. National Security Advisor. Stay with us. We'll be right back. You're listening to Matt Nair on Air. This is the Civic Media Radio Network. Good morning. Welcome back to Matt Nair on Air. Jane Matt Nair, Greg Bach, Calvin on the board. Coming to you from our studio in Radio Park in Racine. You can join us, call, text 855-752-4842. Excited to have our guest with us, former UN ambassador and former U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice is here, and we're talking about the importance of this election, whether you're voting early or you're going to vote on November 5th. Absolutely, your vote matters. Every vote counts. Susan, I wanted to talk about your experience dealing with world leaders, not just in the UN, but also your role as National Security Advisor. And I keep thinking back, and maybe a lot of people don't remember this, but early in Donald Trump's first term, he had cabinet members all surrounding him on a big table, and they all had to say what the greatest thing was about working for him. Do you remember that?
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
It was excruciating.
It was
just, and
awful.
so how dangerous is it to have a man who is so susceptible to flattery be in dealings with people like Xi from China and Putin of Russia and Orban of Hungary and Erdogan and Turkey? It just seems like if you tell him he looks really good and he's really smart, he'll let you do whatever you want.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, and that's it's exceedingly dangerous to have an American president, a commander in chief, who can be manipulated and played by foreign adversaries simply by appealing to his vanity and his ego or his pocketbook. And the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans, they all figured that out. And, that's why, Ivanka Trump got all these trademarks in China, and why people, fell over themselves to spend money at Trump hotels, because they knew that was the way to influence Donald Trump. Donald Trump, sadly, cares about one person on this planet, himself, and has never had the U.S. national interest at heart. And that's really incredibly dangerous. So, that's why he's sending love letters back and forth to Kim Jong-un, who's clearly one of the most dangerous and significant adversaries we face. That's why he, chooses Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence agencies. And that's why he says, Xi Jinping is a great man and a great, leader, governs with an iron fist, and says that with admiration and envy.
Yes.
That just puts the United States national security at grave risk when anybody can manipulate him. The other thing you may not remember, do you remember when Donald Trump met one-on-one with Vladimir Putin with no aides in the room?
Yes.
And then destroyed the transcript that the interpreter made? I mean, what the heck is that about? What is he talking about? Why is Donald Trump now, after leaving the presidency, talking to Vladimir Putin on the phone up to 7 times? That's not to say happy birthday. You know, there's something serious they're talking about. Is it inviting Vladimir Putin again to interfere in our election on Donald Trump's behalf? Is it cutting some backside deal on Ukraine? Like, what is it? This is terrifying, and it's dangerous. And that's one of the many reasons why, you know, we can't afford Donald Trump as our commander in chief. And it's why, you know, you talked about the folks sitting around the cabinet room table, place I've been many times, you know, all expressing their fealty and affection for Donald Trump. And it's like some kind of, you know, communist parody. But now, you know, let's look at where things are after 4 years of Donald Trump. His own vice president, 2 of his defense secretaries, 2 of his national security advisors, 1 of his secretaries of state, his White House chief of staff, John Kelly, who just spoke out again this week, all clearly say, and his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, that Donald Trump is unfit to serve as president. He is a danger to the United States. And now we're hearing in very plain terms that they consider him to be fascist to the core. So these are the people who, after having, you know, to kiss the ring around the table in the cabinet room, have seen enough to say, this is not just crazy, it's, you know, it's very, very dangerous. And they are coming out to say, we cannot put him back in the Oval Office.
Thank you so much, Susan Rice. We were talking about this before you joined us as well. Unfortunately, now all those people, there's no grace period. Once you come out against Donald Trump, you're not even a rhino anymore. You're automatically a liberal. That's just
you're an enemy of the people.
Yeah, you're an enemy of the people.
And he's going to use revenge and retribution in the military against anybody who disagrees with him. That's what's at stake.
Go vote. Your vote matters. Every single vote matters. Susan Rice was the ambassador to the UN and also served as the U.S. National Security Advisor. Susan, it has been such an honor having you on the show. Thank you so very much for your time.
Great to be with you. Get out and vote. Thanks a lot.
Get out and vote. Early voting underway in Wisconsin.